Welcome to this ATG webinar, Everyday Dynamo. My name is Patrick Podeyn. I am a technical specialist here at ATG located in the Phoenix office. A little bit about me, technical specialist here. I've been using Revit now since 2012. I've been using Dynamo now since 2014, and I am a certified professional in both architecture and structural for Revit. So kind of the learning objectives today, one thing we'll be looking at is how to load in custom packages from Dynamo, and then a resource from the website to see where you can download them from. We'll look at gathering and export out data using Excel and Dynamo. We'll also look at loading in elements from closed Revit files, and then we'll also work with lists and sublists. So kind of the first workflow we're going to go through the day is we're going to go extract data out of Excel and kind of create Revit levels. So the workflow is right here, but I'm going to kind of go step by step and kind of define what we're going through and what we're going to be using and why we're using what we're using. I kind of use the word every day, not necessarily these workflows you're going to be using them every day, but the bits and pieces from these workflows, more than definitely you're going to be using them every day if you are using Dynamo every day. The next workflow we'll kind of work through is going to be copying walls out of Revit, out of a Revit file in the background. And we're going to be kind of playing around with dictionaries here to help pick and choose which sort of walls we want to pull out from that background file. The next one, we're going to collect and write data to furniture families. And so if you follow me on LinkedIn, I made a post about this recently, using a list combined to set multiple parameters rather than having a chain of element set parameters going from one to another. There's multiple ways to do this with setting parameters. This is just the way that I found the easiest. Again, we're going to go through step by step, kind of defining why we're using the nodes that we're using. And then lastly, we're going to collect elements and the data that is stored within those elements, and then we are going to write that information to Excel. We are going to probably use the entire hour for this presentation, so I do ask that you hold off on your questions until the end. This webinar is being recorded, so at the conclusion of this webinar, the video link will be sent out as soon as our marketing team is done editing it. So let's get started. So kind of first off, the resource to go to if you're wanting to see what sort of packages are out there, through the dynamobim.org website. And so how you kind of get to that, the same way you would go through if you're wanting to install the latest version of Dynamo on anything prior than 2020. So we're going to get Dynamo. We'll scroll down a little bit past all of this, and here we'll see the node packages. And so it tells you how many packages have been downloaded, the packages on there, and then the amount of users. So if we click on Discover Packages, it'll take us into this menu, and we can kind of see all the packages that are out there in the world, the most installed. Probably want to install those. There's been a couple of AU classes that have been done that kind of highlight specific Dynamo packages that are useful and worth installing. So let's kind of minimize this out. Let's jump into Revit and jump into our first workflow. So I'm in a blank Revit file right now, blank template, and I have 2 levels in here right now. And so I'm going to be extracting data out of an Excel file in order to create those elements for us. The main intent isn't here that we're creating levels. The main intent here is how we extract data out of Excel and work with it. So let's go ahead and open up Dynamo. Hopefully it opens, there we go. So kind of backtracking a little bit, how to install a package will be through this menu here, and we'll go to packages, search for a package. So once you find the package on there that you want to install, maybe it's one of the most used ones, you'll wait for this to sync with the server. Sometimes this takes a while, depending on your internet speed and a couple other things, but once it loads up, we'll be able to begin searching for packages. And this is going to display all of the packages, and the first ones that'll kind of show up are the most recent ones that have been published. And so you can see here, this one's been published as of today. So say for instance, a really popular package is a package called Rhythm. So here we have the package called Rhythm. And so if we click on this, it gives us a full description on what the package is doing for us. And if it's compatible with Dynamo versions 1.3.4, which is only used in Revit 2017, and then 2.0 and up is going to be anything from 17 and up. Dynamo in Revit 2020 automatically updates when they release a new version or a new update of Revit. All you do here to install is click on this button here, and it's going to install the latest version of the package for you. If you have this package already in there, it's going to ask you to uninstall it, probably close out of Dynamo and Revit completely, and then it'll install and come back in and reinstall it. So let's go ahead and close that. We're going to start a brand new file. So we want to extract data out of Excel. A couple nodes that we're going to need off the bat is first and foremost the import Excel node. So two ways you can search. I usually right click on the canvas to search. You can search up here in the library, or if you know where everything is located in the library here, go ahead and search for it there. But we're going to be looking for a node called data.import Excel. So if you hover on this, it gives you a description as far as what it's going to do. It lays out the inputs, what it's looking for. So we're looking for a file, a sheet name, read a string, show Excel, and it kind of gives you an indication of what sort of information you want to input in there. So file variable, I know I need to input some sort of file, some sort of path. Sheet name, it's looking for a string, so some form of text. And so that text is going to be derived from your Excel spreadsheet, and it's going to be the actual sheet name. Read as strings, we can, if we have numbers in our file and we want to read them as strings, we can set that Boolean to a true value to then view that information as a string. So we'll go import Excel. So we're looking for a file, we're looking for some sort of path. So I'm going to search for a node here called file path. So this is going to allow me to go through my browser and search for the Excel file I want to actually use. So I'll go ahead and hit browse, go to my Excel, and so my create levels. Let me open that up, and this is what it looks like. I have all my floor levels in here, the name, and then I have the actual number that I want to associate to that level. This could be a combination of any sort of data that you're wanting to extract from an Excel file. And purely for this example, I'm wanting to rename the levels or name them by this and then use this information to create the elevation or the level. So I'm gonna hit browse here, go to Excel, create levels. I'm gonna hit open. So basically what that does is just extracts it. We need to get one more node. We need to get the file from path. And so what this is going to do is it's going to create a file object from the path, which we need. It shows up with yellow because there's nothing going into it and we're running on automatic. So I'll tie this into here, the yellow goes away, and I can see the actual location as to where it's at. Sheet name is going to be derived by down here, and so I see it's called sheet 1. So a couple ways that we can input this data is either searching for the string node. We can use a string to create a string, or the other method that I typically use the most is creating a code block. Creating a code block, I double left click on my canvas and it brings up this code block. So how we kind of create a string is we need to put the information in quotes. So quote, sheet 1. This is case sensitive. So if you're not getting information right away, it's probably because it's not named correctly or the case sensitivity isn't there. So what I'm gonna do now is input this into sheet name and input this file into file. I open this up and I can see the actual data that lives within my Excel file. And so it's broken into sublists, and so it pairs them up. So this information and this information is going to be list 0, being list 1. In Dynamo and any sort of coding, we start with 0 as our first item. This will be item 1, so on and kind of so forth. And so kind of from here, you can do a number of things. There's multiple ways to kind of extract this information and separate it in a way that can work. So let's go get a node that we can use to create a level and look at the information to help us determine how we want to organize this list. So I'm going to search for a node called level.by elevation and name. And so if I see here for elevation, it's looking for a double. It's looking for a number of some sort. I go to name, it's looking for a name. It's looking for some sort of string. And so since I didn't say read as strings, this is going to read it as a number automatically. If I were to convert this to a string right away, this would have converted to a string. So how I'm going to manage this data, I'm going to first transpose it. So I want to get all my elevation names all in the same sort of index. So if I search for a node called Transpose, I can see here's the first item. It's going to swap the rows and columns, tie data into my list. If I hover down, I can see it's organized all of my data into one. So I can see all my floor names or level names are in one list, and all of my elevations are in another list. So there's a couple ways to sort of extract this information. We can't simply just type list and elevation and name and be good with it. No, we need to separate this information a little bit further. So there's a couple ways to do it. So the first way is using a node called list.getItemAtIndex. And so what this is going to do is it's going to look into our list based off of an index that we input, and it's going to grab all of that information. And so since I want to grab index 0 out of here and have it as one list, I'm going to tie lists into here. And for my index, I want to grab index 0. So here I'm going to create a code block. This is requiring a number or an integer, so a whole number, not necessarily a double that could be a number with a decimal at the end. We need to input an integer. So quick way to create an integer with a code block is just type in the number itself. You'll see it highlight as blue. That is an indication that this is actually a number or an integer. You can see here that the sheet is kind of a brown reddish color. That's an indicator that this is a string. So I'm going to tie 0 into my index. Look at the drop down, and I can see here I have now grabbed everything at index 0. So this is going to be used for my name. I like to group my nodes together, so I'll select both nodes by window selecting over, right click, and I'm going to create a group. Here I can name my group, call this level name. Drag this down a little bit because I like to organize my workflows and my nodes in a way to where I don't have crisscrossing wires or anything like that. I like everything to be sort of linear and not have anything intersecting with one another. So that's my level name. I need to now extract everything at index 1 to grab out that number. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to duplicate this group because I want to reuse these same set of nodes. One of two ways I can do it. I can hit Control-C, Control-V, creates that, or I can hover on this, hold down Control, and then select to create a copy of it. Kind of whichever way makes most sense to you, whichever way you feel is most comfortable. So I'm going to drag this here. Now I want to grab everything at index 1. So I'm just going to simply change this number to 1. Look at the drop down, and I have all of my numbers. And so if you're a little bit, if you're wondering, you know, is this exactly a number? Is this a string? What is this? There's a node that we can use to look at that information and see what it actually is. So I'm going to search in here object type. And so what this is going to do is it's going to return the type of object that it is within Dynamo as a string. So I'm going to pull this out here, tie item into object, scroll down. Okay, it is a double elevation. All right, we're looking for a double as an input. We're outputting a double. All right, we're good to go. You can leave this off to the side or delete it, whichever you want to do. So from here, I'm going to want to tie this information to here and this into here. Before I do that, what I like to do before I create anything inside of Revit, I like to change it to manual. Reason being is there's some nodes out there that can run into a circular loop. Let's see, it says the audio occasionally blank out. Is anybody else hearing me kind of cut in, cut out, or is the audio kind of clear? Okay, clear audio. All right, so if you're getting kind of broken up audio, don't worry. The recording is going to have me speaking clearly. So whenever you get that, if I am cutting out, I apologize. When you get the video, it'll come through clearly. All right, so we just set our workflow to run as manual, meaning we have to manually execute this workflow each and every single time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually rename this to level number or elevation number, whichever. I'm gonna tie this into elevation and tie name into here. And so you can kind of go either way. I tend to go left to right and then right to, just a way for me to kind of make it a little bit faster when I'm connecting nodes from one to another. So since this is in manual mode, we have to manually execute it. A couple ways to do that: you can hit F5 on your keyboard, or you can simply hit run. So as soon as I hit run, I can see here that it creates my levels. I can look at Revit itself, and I can see here that all of these levels were created. And so again, this is just showing how to extract data out of an Excel file and utilize it. You could branch off on this workflow here and actually create floor plans for these levels. Kind of it's up to you in kind of what you want to do. So created our levels. So next thing I want to do is I want to make sure these levels are put on the right work set. So if I click on this level here, it's on work set 1. I really don't want it on work set 1. I want it on my shared levels and grids work set, or whatever work set you have defined in your project that will host datum elements. Come back out to here. So from here, I want to now set that parameter by a name. So the node I'm going to look for is element.set parameter by name. So what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to take a bit of information from the model and use it to set and put these levels on the correct work set. So if I scroll down here, I look at the work set name. So the work set name is called work set. So if I hover in here, this is looking for an actual Revit element. Parameter name, it's looking for a string, and it's looking for some sort of value to input. So I'm going to tie my level into my element because those are the elements I want to set. It's looking for a parameter name. I'm going to create a code block. I'm going to type in work set. Tie that into there. And then we're going to need a couple nodes from a custom package called Archilab. So from here, I'm going to search for a node called worksets. And I'm going to need this one here from Archilab, and this one's going to retrieve all of the worksets in my file that I have open. So shared levels and grids. And so if I plug this into here, it's not going to work. Here's why. This is just reading the actual name itself. It's not actually any sort of information. So if I type this into here, hit F5, it's not going to run because it's looking for some sort of actual parameter value. So what I need to do here is I need to actually get the workset ID to use to actually set that value. So if I look here, workset ID, I'll drop that in my workflow. Connect those two together, hit F5, I can see I have the actual workset ID. From here, I can type this integer into this value here, hit F5, that goes away, and I can see here it's outputting those elements that I was working with previously. If I go back into Revit, I can see here that these grids or levels have actually moved on to the shared levels and grids workset. So in this workflow, kind of recapping, we grabbed data out of an Excel file, extracted it, transposed it so it was a little bit easier for us to manage and grab that information and data, created a level off of that, and then based off of those levels, we moved them onto the correct work set. All right, so that's kind of example number one. The second example here we're going to do is we're going to grab elements in a closed file, extract them, and paste them into our open document. So go ahead and close this one right now. Go open, copy walls. I have a container file that has my walls in there. I've inputted a type mark into my walls to kind of make it a little bit easier for me to extract those walls, give me some method to extract them in a lot easier sense. So go ahead and open up this file. So if I go into walls, I can see here I have just one wall per group. So one basic wall, one curtain wall, one stacked wall. If I open up my container file, you can see here I have all my walls placed with a mark on them for me to use. So yeah, you could have copied and pasted, but what fun is that? Let's use Dynamo. Let's just go ahead and open up Dynamo again. So we're going to be using a couple custom packages here. We're going to be using Rhythm, and we're going to be using one node from Clockwork. That is a pretty useful tool. So we're going to start from scratch. We're going to open up a blank document. And so since we want to open up a document in the background, the node that we're going to be specifically looking for is in the Rhythm package. And this node is called applications.openDocumentFile. So .open document file. We can see it here. So the description says this node will open a given file in the background. It's looking for a file path. Do we want to audit it, detach from central preserve? This is a really good file if you want to upgrade files as well. I typically use this to just extract elements out of a closed file, or extracting maybe a link, elements out of a link. So kind of use this node kind of universally. So we're looking for a file path. And so I'll type in file path here. And so we need to go and navigate to our container file. So I'll hit browse here, go back here, go into Revit, grab my container file. You can leave this in automatic mode. So I'm going to tie this into here, hover on here, and I can see it's opened the actual document itself. So what do we need to do now? We need to go collect elements out of this file. So another node from Rhythm that I'm going to use is a node called collector.elements of type in document. So I'm going to tie my documents into my document because it's looking for the actual document itself. And so now I'm searching for an element type. So I'm going to right click here, look for element types. I can see here it's going to give me all element types. Drop down, we're going to go to wall, tag or put walls into element types, and we can see here all of our walls in our project. And so the reason I use elements of type in document is because I want to get the element types. I do have walls placed in my project, and so if I were to use the category one, it would get all elements of that category regardless if it's placed or not. And so for this instance, I purely want to get the walls that are loaded in my file itself. So from here, we're going to do some sort of extracting because we're going to create a dictionary at some point to use to sort of filter and grab walls that we need. And so I'm using the type mark in this instance. And so another node that Rhythm has inside of it is the ability to get a parameter value by type or instance. And so to search for that node, it's called elements.get parameter by type or instance. There is another one that he created to search for it regardless of case sensitivity, whichever one you want to use. So I'll use the element get parameter value by type or instance. And so since I'm working with elements here, even though it's in the background, I can still extract the parameter data out of there, out of those elements. So I'll tie elements into element. The parameter I'm looking for is the type mark. So I'll double click here to create a string called type. I could spell type mark, create that there, tie that into parameter name, and then we can see here all of the values that I have given to those walls are now here. So how do we kind of pick and choose and grab which elements we want to? Sure, we can create a get item at index and pick and choose which walls we want to pull out of there. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to create a dictionary. So we're going to create a dictionary here. And so prior to, I believe, 2019's version of Dynamo 2.0, the ability to create a dictionary, you had to use code blocks for that. And then they added it into out-of-the-box Dynamo, as you can see here. So what we're going to do is we need to first create our dictionary. So the reason I've extracted this out is to use this as my keys. And so I'm going to use these as keys. And so whenever I put in, say, a P11, it's going to be tied to the wall that is corresponding to that P11 when I create that dictionary. So when I type in a P11 or maybe a P14, it's going to grab that actual element itself rather than grabbing that actual type mark. So we need to get dictionary by keys and values. So it's going to be this node up here by keys and values. And so like I said earlier, these are my keys. So keys are going to go into here. And then my actual values themselves are going to be these elements here, the walls, being that whenever I input this key into my dictionary, it's going to grab this wall for me. Keys into values. By hovering here, I can see that it's actually associated them one-to-one. The organization, it organizes it based off here. I'm not sure on why it sorted it this way. Just know that we are going to get the corresponding wall because these are one-to-one linear. And then in here, I'm not sure of the reason why it's sorting it in this way. So the next node that we're going to need here is the ability to grab a value out of this via the key. So the node is called dictionary.value@key. This one right here. And so it's going to obtain the value at a specified key. It's looking for a dictionary, and it's also looking for a key with the input of a string. So I'll tie dictionary into dictionary there, looking for a key. And so now I can create a code block. Say I want to grab two walls, for example, to input more than one string in a list. Dictionaries are not sorted. Got it. All right, so I'm going to create a list of strings here. So the first one I'm going to use, let's go ahead and grab, say, P15. P15, this is case sensitive. Hit a comma. Next one, let's grab P2. And next one, let's grab P3. P3. Now we have to close the bracket. As soon as I do that, hover on the bottom, I can see it's now one list, right? So I'll tie this into my key, hover here, and I can see it's pulling the actual wall itself from back here. So this would be a really, clever way if you want to associate a value to, say, an element, and then have some sort of Excel file maybe producing those keys, and then pull specific elements based off of a key input. So now that we have our walls that we want to copy into our file, the next thing we want to do is actually copy those elements into our file. So this is another node from Rhythm called documents.copy elements from document. You can copy views, and then you can also copy elements from a linked document. So we're going to use this node, copy elements from document. So it's looking for the source document. Where is our source document? Our source document is going to be back here because this is the file that we're using to open and extract elements out of. So I'll tie document from here into my source document. Now it's looking for elements. So since I'm going to actually be creating elements inside of my Revit file, I'm going to switch over from automatic to manual mode. So we'll switch to manual mode here. I'll tie value into elements. Hit this drop down, drum roll please, F5. Boom, we have our walls in our file. We can go into our Revit file itself and we can see that it actually copied those walls in there. We go into walls itself. You can see we've copied in 3 extra walls into our project. So purely for this example, we are copying walls. You can have this as like a container file if you want to have, if say you don't want to have your template populated with 100 walls and your project only requires maybe 7 different wall types, or maybe not walls, maybe view templates, views, kind of anything that you can think of that you want to store in an external file to then pull into a brand new document. Now, we are not completely done here. We still have this document open in the background. We definitely want to close this document. If we do not close this and try to do any more work, Dynamo will get angry at us and yell at us and potentially crash. So what we need to do is close it, and we're going to use another rhythm node called application.closeDocument. Close document here, and so this node will close the given document with the save option. So I'm going to place this here. I can tie documents into here, and save is going to be, do you want to save, yes or no? We can decide if we want to do that. So say you built this workflow out and you have it in a way that you want to continue to reuse it over and over and over. One node I like to use and input into my workflows is a pass-through node, being that it's got to wait for something to complete before it sends that piece of information through, because we don't want to run into an instance that could potentially happen where it closes the document before copying in any elements. This is kind of a safe way to make sure that the workflow does work. It copies everything over and then it closes the document at the end. So this is a clockwork node. It's called PassThrough. And so this node kind of took me a while to figure out, but after I did, I realized how huge and how big this node was and how impactful it was for some of the workflows that I was developing. And so we're going to give it a pass-through. This is the information that's going to come out of here before or after something happens. So pass-through is going to be our document. So I'm going to hover over here, grab the document itself, go into my pass-through, tie this pass-through into my document. I want it to wait for this portion of my workflow to finish. Tie new elements into wait for. I haven't hit run yet, so it's not going to actually save the document. Do you want to save it? Yes or no? I believe if you leave it blank, it doesn't save it itself, but we're going to input a value here. So a couple ways to define a Boolean. You can either type in true or false here. If I could spell false. The other way to do it is using a 0. 0 represents false, 1 represents true. And then you can use a Boolean node, true, false. So whichever way you want to do it, there's 3 different ways to sort of determine a false value. So I'll tie this into here. I don't want to save it. I'll hit F5, and it's told me that the document is now closed. So from there, I can now close this out safely, not have to worry about anything yelling at me, because you definitely want to make sure if you're opening a document in the background that you definitely close it. Please, please, please make sure you do that. All right, so that's that workflow. Let's go ahead and close this one out. The next workflow that we're going to do is we are going to search for all elements of a category. In this particular case, we're going to look for furniture. And we're going to paste that information into a parameter that we have defined. So let's go ahead. Open up my Furniture Central file. And so for this example, I'm going to use furniture. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract out the phase created, as well as what room it's located in, manipulate that information for the room, and then write that information to a specified parameter. For the phase created portion, I did create a project parameter called phase created. Purely for this example, we're just going to take this information and write it into here as a simple text string. So let's go ahead and open up Dynamo. All right, so we're going to start from blank again. So I want to grab all of my furniture categories that are in my project. And so how we do that is we use two nodes. First node is categories, because we want to grab that, we want to specify what category we want to grab. Here we're going to look for furniture here, and then we're going to get all elements of category because we want to get all placed elements of that category. All elements of category. We're going to type category into category here. And if I look at the drop down here, I can see all 435 of my elements that are furniture of the furniture category in my model. And so how we extract the room information from a family, obviously if you can turn on the room calculation point to extract it from there. There's also another useful node that Rhythm has created. It's called family-instances.room. And so I want to know what room this is in. Once I grab the room that it's in, I can extract any bit of information from this room to then write to say this furniture family. Say you have something in your project and you want to know what room it's in, and you want to take that information from that room and write it to that actual element itself. You can use this node. So I'm going to right click on my canvas. I'm going to look for family instances.room. Nope. There we go, family instances.room. And so this node will report the room if the family instance resides in it, if available. So I'm going to tie this to here. And from those two, I can now see what rooms those elements are actually located in. And so from here, like I said, we're now working with our room element. We can now extract information out of our room element itself. So I'll search for room name to grab the room name. Room name. Tie those in together. I can see here the room names that are specified by those rooms. I want to now grab the room number. Room number. I can see the numbers that are associated to those rooms. If I wanted to grab any other bit of information, I definitely can do that with an element get parameter. For this example, I'm going to combine these two lists of information together, and then write it to a specific parameter that I've determined. Before we do that, we need to go grab another bit of information. We need to go grab the phase created. And so if we hover on this, we can see the phase created set to new construction. So we're going to use an element.get parameter by name here. Parameter value by name. Tie my elements into element. And then now I'm looking for phase created. If I hover on this, it just gives me the actual phase that it's on. So I want to get the actual name of that phase. So I can type element.name to retrieve the name of that phase. If I hover on here, I can see the actual phase itself. I can see a whole bunch of new constructions. Oh, we have some existings in there. That's fine. We're going to write that to that information. Drag this up here. And so I'm going to kind of split apart these two bits of information so I can work on this part down here to create a combined bit of information, being the room name and the room number combined into one. So that way I can use that to write to my room name. So what we're going to do first is we're going to use a list create. We're going to use a list create node so we can create a list of these two into one. And so depending on how you put it in, room name is going to be first and room number. Maybe you want to switch that up to room name, room number, like such. kind of how you want the information to be written out. From here, I'm going to do a list transpose because the node that I'm going to be using is called it's called string.join. String.join. And so it's looking for a separator and a string. And so for the separator, I want it to be a space / space. You have to include those spaces in there. It doesn't know that you want spaces in there, if you want spaces, that is. So I'll tie this into separator. And so if I mainly just tie list into string, look at it, it gives me this information here. And so how we get it to not do this and go 121 cafeteria is we have to transpose this list first. So we'll go ahead and transpose this list. We can see it here. Now they're combined into one. So 121 cafeteria, 121 cafeteria, so on, so forth. Now if we tie lists into strings, it's going to join those two strings together with our separator here. Took me a while to kind of figure this node out, but once I did, I jumped for joy. All right, so what we need to do now, since this is an indented list, what I like to do, since I don't need it to be indented at all, I'm just going to simply flatten it. List.flatten, tie my string into the list here. And I can see here that it's now one list. It's no longer indented. So now I have my information that I want to use for my room name and number. And I also have the phase created. So now the node that we're going to need to use is kind of two nodes. I went over this in my LinkedIn post. If you follow me on LinkedIn, to set multiple parameters at one time, we're going to be using a node called list combine. Let's combine here. And so it's going to take an input as well as the two lists and kind of combine them together. Element dot set parameter. Set parameter by name. And so element's going to tie into here. However, we need to feed it an element itself. The element itself that we're feeding it is going to be all of our furniture families that we extracted. So element's going to tie into element. And so now what we need to do is we need to create a list for these two inputs here. I'll use another list create. And so how you input this information into this list create is going to determine how you're going to write out your parameter names. So I'm going to tie in my phase created first and then my room name and number. Tie this in the list here. Now we're going to set this to manual mode. For the list, so this list 2 corresponds to this value. Parameter name corresponds to list 1. So we need to input our parameter name into our list here. Let me zoom in there. And if I see here, I can see all of the information that I have as a indented list. So I'm going to create another code block here. And so my phase created is the first one I'm going to input. Let's go back into Revit and see what the actual parameter name is called. Phase created underscore, no spaces. So to create a list of strings, start a bracket again. Phase created underscore, end quote, comma, and then now the parameter I want to write the room name and number into. For this example, I'm going to use comments. And the bracket there. So I'm going to tie this into here. And so what this is going to do is it's going to individually use this portion and use this portion to set to the parameter. And then it's going to take the elements on, or the data on index 1 and write it to this parameter here. So we go ahead and hit F5 there. It says null. Did I name this wrong? I bet I did. I forgot the D. Phase created. So if I hit F5 again, we can see here that it's going to actually write that data to that parameter as well as write the information from the room name to that data. So let's go into Revit and take a look at it. So if I select on this, I can see here, phase created set to new construction. And then I can see the room name and number selected there. If I select on this, I see the number and then the name of the room. So I know that it verified and it did it correctly. So kind of the takeaways on this one. So here we're extracting data out of out of our file, obtaining the room that it's located in, grabbing information from the room that it's located in, and then writing it to that element itself. And then the other takeaway here is utilizing a list combine to set multiple parameters at one time. Again, there are multiple ways to do this. This is just the one way that I figured out to kind of do it the fastest way. Alrighty, so let's go into our last example. We have about 15 minutes left. We might run a little bit over. Let's close this out, close out of this file, don't save, relinquish. We're gonna go open, grab this file, override. And so I kind of did the same workflow prior on this, this graph here, on this Revit file here. However, I have modified and manipulated some of the elements work sets. It's here the phase created as well as the room location in there. And so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be extracting out a couple parameters, and we're going to use that information and write it to Excel. And so the big takeaway here is prepping your information to be exported out to Excel. So let's go ahead and open up Dynamo. So we're going to utilize some of the techniques that we used in the previous workflow for this workflow here. So for one, we're going to be, again, extracting the categories, all of those elements of that category, and then we're going to grab information out of there. So first things first, I want to grab all of my furniture families or furniture elements, categories, look for furniture, furniture, all elements of category. Tie those two into one another. You can see here all of my furniture families located in the project. And so, like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to extract out a couple parameters out of these families. First one we're going to extract out is the comments, and then this phase created, and then the work set that it's located on. So I'm going to use an element get parameter by value here. Get parameter value by name. Tie elements into here. And so I can input a list of strings into here to extract out all of the data that is inside of those families. So again, I'll create a code block, start with a bracket. I'm going to extract out the phase created, the work set, and the comments. And so how you input this is going to determine at the end when we're creating the fields, so to speak, to have as rows and columns. So here I have phase created, work sets, and comments. I'll tie that into there. And so I only got one element that displayed that. And so a couple things I can do. One thing that I can modify and play with the list at level if I want to, or I can modify the lacing and set it to cross product, meaning this is going to iterate over each and every single one of these elements. And so we can see here, index 0 is going to be this first Revit element here. And so I have the phase created, the work set in the element ID, and then the comments, which was the number and room name. So I need to modify this. I don't want to see the element or the ID that's associated with that work set. I want to get the actual name of the work set. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a get item at index. We saw that in our first example. So list.get item at index. So I want to get index 1 in this nested list. So I'll tie list into list. Index, we're looking for index 1. And if I tie this into here, look at this, it's going to get index 1 because it's looking and working on this outside list. So what we need to do here is we need to work on the list at level in order to look at the next set of items that are in our lists. So if I click on this button here and I say use levels, automatically changes it to level 2, which is level 2 here. and I can see all of the IDs that are associated here. So now I can work with this information here. So there's a node that I want to use. It's called workset.name from ID. Name from ID. It's from a package called Wombat Dynamo, a really good package to look into. So I'll tie item into ID, and it's going to display out the names of my work sets in here. So after we have this and all said and done, now we need to replace this information with this, or replace this information with this here. And so how we're going to do that is we're going to use a node called list replace item at index. Replace item at index. And so I want to use this one with the integer value. So if I hover here, this one's looking for an integer, the other one's looking for a variable. We're going to be using this one here. So I'll tie my list into this index. Okay, it's going to go to index 1. Tie my string into here. Let's look at it. Oh no, it didn't do it correctly. It inserted it on the outside. So what we need to do is we need to play with the list at level again. So we need to analyze at list level 2 on our list input here. So we do that. It doesn't necessarily fix it up all the way. And what we need to do is set this list at looking at level 1, meaning that it's going to subdivide these into their own sublists. So if I change this to at 2, change it to 1, we can see here that now it's going to replace that it's going to replace interior from within the 380. And so we can see here that it's done that for us, mainly by playing with the list at level. Usually when I'm working through a Dynamo workflow and something isn't working right and I have nested lists, I tend to like to play with the list at level a lot, kind of test around. A lot of this is going to be test and fail. Maybe you don't fail on the first time. Maybe you fail a couple times, but after you play with the list at level a couple times, it begins to work for you. So this is going to be one that you're going to need to kind of experiment with if you're playing with nested lists. So other bits of information that I want to obtain is I want to obtain the element name. And say I want to manipulate this information and then write it back to my my Revit families. The bit of information that we're going to need for this is going to actually be the element ID, because when we go and extract this Excel file back into our Revit file, it doesn't know what sort of element that is that you're trying to set. And so we need to extract out the element ID that's associated to all of these furniture families here. So if we extract all of those out, we can use a node to grab the elements by that ID to then use to write that information. So I'm going to get the element name, meaning I'm going to search for the name of this element. Element name, elements into element, and I want to grab the element ID to be able to manipulate my data in Excel and then write that back to my Revit file using Dynamo. Element ID. So if I hover here, I can see the names and I can see the element IDs themselves. I'm going to move this bit of information over to here. So what I want to do here when preparing to send this to Excel, I want to actually transpose this list first. So when I combine this information and this information here, they kind of play nicely together. So I'm going to use a list create here to create a list. Tie those two together to create a list. And so now if I were to join these two together, this bit of information would start at 0, the element ID would start at 1, and then we would have the phase created, and then we would have the workset name and then the room name and number. This is just a way for me to sort of manipulate my information in order to have the least possible resistance when combining these lists together. So the node I'm going to use here to combine these two is actually called list.combine. So list combine, or list.join, I'm sorry. List.join. And so this is going to join two lists together. And so I want this bit of information to come before this information. So I'll tie those in together to there. Look at this drop down and I can see that it's inserted that list above everything else. So here I'm just playing around with my information to get it to work nicely when I input it in this list.join. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to now untranspose this. So we transpose it and then we're going to retranspose this list to get it in a working way for when we plug it into Excel, that it's going to have rows and columns. So row, row your boat gently down the stream, and then to display out in our Excel file. Next, what I want to do is I want to create sort of a header for my Excel spreadsheet, meaning that I want the first thing to tell me what it is. So name, element ID, phase created, the work set it's on, and then the room name and number. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a code block, and I'm going to write out that information. So name, element ID, phase created, work set, room name, / number, and bracket. And so now I have this list here. So now I'm going to use a list insert to insert at the front of my list. You could use a list join if you wanted to. For this example, I'm going to use a list insert to make sure that it always does go to the front. List insert. So my list, the elements I want to tie into that list itself, or elements, and then the index I want it to be written to, which is index 0. So from here, I can actually hit enter, type in the number 0, tie that into there, and I can see here that now how it's going to display, it's going to give me the name, element ID, and so this is going to be my first row within my Excel file. So the last node we need, the node that's going to write all of this information to Excel, is the node called data.export Excel. So now we've modified all of our information into a formatted way that we can then write to Excel. So it's looking for a file path. So I'm going to use a file path node. File path. I'm going to hit browse. It's not going to find, I'm not going to find any sort of Excel file, though you can, if you have something already created, you can specify and choose it there. And then in the override options, you would just say set that to true. Here, I'm just going to call this furniture data.xlsx, which is the file path for an Excel file. So I'll tie that there, tie a file path into there. So since I am creating and writing information to Excel, I need to set this to manual. Again, anytime that you are creating data or sending data somewhere, always best bet is to send it into manual. And then the other thing kind of that probably should come before that is save your graph. I can't tell you how many times I've been working on a graph. I'm 3 hours in working on it. I don't set it to manual. I plug a node into another node and it runs into an infinite loop. I look at the top and it says home with an asterisk. I kind of face palm, hit my head on the table. So always save at periodic points within your workflows. And then whenever you're going in and creating any sort of Revit data or sending data from somewhere to somewhere, always send it into manual and save. Can't tell you how many times I've lost numerous hours of work because I didn't save or I didn't set it to manual. So we need to specify a sheet name. So I'll create a code block here, call this furniture. And then I need to specify the start row, start column. I want to start at 0, so I'm going to hit 0 there, tie those two into there, start row, start column, start at 0, sheet name is furniture. Now I tie my list into my data. Now I hit F5 run. Created the Excel file. Let's go ahead and look at it, and it worked. And so it sorted the data in the way that I wanted to sort it in, being everything is in a row and in a column. So I have my name, all of my Revit families, all the names for them, the element IDs that are associated to them, the phase created, the work set that they're located on, as well as the room name and number. Probably should switch that up. But regardless, I have all of that information set here in my Excel file. And so that kind of a couple takeaways here is how we send data to Excel, how the data needs to be organized in order to send it to Excel, in order to kind of see it maybe in this manner. We want to have them set in sort of sublists like we see here, using list transpose in unison to manipulate our data in a much easier way to experience the least path of resistance, utilizing our list joins, playing with our lists at level, play with those, experiment with them. Probably a workflow that's not working for you, probably because the list at level isn't set correctly, and then also just grabbing element data. So that's going to conclude this webinar. Thank you so much for joining. My Twitter is there at @TheNotoriousBIM. If you're not following me on LinkedIn, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. I tend to share a lot of my workflows, useful tips and tricks that I tend to find that I feel people in the Dynamo community need to know. Maybe you're a really experienced Dynamo user, and maybe there's something that I can help give you to help you in your Dynamo journey. So thank you. I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes to kind of field any questions that you guys have. If you have them, go ahead and throw them in the comments, and then I will get to them. But other than that, thank you so much for coming. I hope to do more of these Dynamo webinars here. I have a lot of them kind of lined up, so kind of be on the lookout for those. I'll kind of try to give you guys heads up whenever I'm going to be giving a Dynamo webinar like this. So again, I'll stay on for a little bit longer. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Other than that, thank you so much.